Hi kindergarten families. So this is a video meant for parents. So if you are a kiddo, you might want to turn this video off and go find a different one. But for parents or family members, this video is meant to explain to you all the different powers that the kids learn and give some terminology that I use with the students when it comes to solving words and writing and reading. So the first part of the video is going to be explaining to you the powers that the kids know and the terminology that we use. And then the second part of the video is going to be some tips and some ways of speaking that I use to help kids when they get stuck on their reading or their writing. Hi kindergarten families. So I've had a few requests on advice when it comes to helping your child figure out words when they're reading. And I want to remind you of this chart that might look familiar. The kiddos know it really well. This is our We Are Super Readers anchor chart. And I want to show you this because it's a huge help when it comes to referencing tips for kids. So let me walk you through this really quick and then I'll show you how as like a coach, parent, or teacher, you can apply this. So the kids gained different superpowers in one of our units on reading. They found out that they had pointer power. That means you point to each word as you read. They have reread power, which means if something doesn't make sense or if they say it the first way like a robot, they know they can go back and reread to make it sound even better or to fix it up. They have partner power, so reading with a friend. If a word doesn't make sense, putting a sticky note on and then waiting to ask someone later and figuring it out together. Picture power, so reading a sentence and then if it doesn't make sense, double check and make sure it matches with the picture with what they said out loud. And then snap word power, so that's if you see a word that looks familiar, don't try to sound it out. Just say it in a snap. And that's really important because some of the snap words aren't don't phonetically make sense like many of the words. And so it's important for the kids to just recognize those snap words and just say them right away and then only slow down and sound out words that they don't know yet. And then sound power, so that's kind of connects with snap word power. So use snap word power, and then if it's not a snap word, then use sound power. And within sound power, we talked about making sure to getting your mouth ready to say the beginning of the sound, making sure to also say the middle of the sound, which a lot of people forget when they're first learning to read, and then making sure to say the end of the sound. And the kids also have learned 2 ways to figure out a word, which is the turtle way, which is where you say it really slow and you run your finger underneath the word, and the robot way, which is when you chop it up, like instead of saying fun and I have to sound it out like a turtle way, you could say fun, and then put it all together. So there's the turtle way and the robot way that they've learned. And then persistence power is just making sure that they're remembering to use all their powers. Book talk power is bringing out that comprehension, making sure that they're not just doing these strategies to read a book, but also understanding the book and making connections with the book. And then they also learned pattern power. So those are more for like A-B books where like the book goes, I can read, I can write, I can sing, and there's a pattern. And so their job is to figure out that first sentence and then play off the power to be able to keep reading it, play off the pattern power to be able to keep reading it smoothly. Once kids their just right books are kind of like C level or beyond, the pattern power drops off. And I talked to the kids about this too. I told them it's kind of like how you learn to ride a bike with training wheels, and then as you get better, if the training wheels fall off and you learn to ride the bike without them. And I told them pattern power is kind of the same way. The first books that you learn to read, they have pattern power. They're kind of like a training wheel. And then as you keep reading harder and harder books, the pattern falls off and you have to keep using all of your other powers and rely on your other powers to make sure you can still read. So just for a visual, if a student was stuck on this word and they came over and they asked me what that word is, I would first look at it and I would think, okay, that's not a snap word, so I'm going to refer them to sound power. So then I'm going to say, oh, use your sound power. And then usually most of the kids will start trying to sound it out like this, and they'll go like that. But if they still didn't know, then I would tell them, you remember you have 2 ways. You have your turtle way, you could say it slow, or you have your robot way. Which one do you want to try? And then maybe they'll say turtle way. And so then I'll point and I'll say, okay, try it out. And then they'll say k-a-t, cat. And I'm not telling them the sounds. As long as that I know that student knows all their sounds, I'm not telling them the sounds. I'm having them rely on their own abilities, and I'm just reminding them what power to use. I'm reminding them what skill to use. Or if they said they wanted to use it turtle way, I would tell them, okay, put your finger underneath the first letter, and now say each sound as you go across, and drag your finger, and then they would say cat. And I would say it faster. And they'll say cat. And if a kiddo is still struggling, then sometimes I'll help them by covering up the word. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to move my turtle finger and you say the words as I uncover it. And then I'll go like this and they'll say k-a-t. Now say it fast. Cat. So that's the turtle way. And then the robot way was saying it like k-a-t, cat. So both times it's chopping up words and then putting them together. So I think one of the most important things to keep in mind at this age is that we're not only teaching the kids how to read, but we're also building this internal identity as a reader. And so I try really hard to not give away words, like not just tell words to a kid when they're stuck on a word, but I try really hard to make sure to refer to those powers. And I use my own teacher knowledge to decide which strategy I'm going to refer them to and then have them figure it out themselves. Because what often happens if a kid gets stuck on a word, they're trying to read and they know it says super mouse jumps off a, and then they get confused and they get stuck. If I just tell them, oh, that says step, then what that does, behind the scenes, is it tells them that they need someone else to help them in order to read. But if they're reading and they say super mouse jumps off a, and then they pause and they don't know what to say, if I say, use your sound power, and then they say sep, and then they still not getting it, I might say, what other powers do you need to use? Did you check your picture power? And then they might look at it, and then they might go back, and they might say, oh, step. And then I'll say, okay, reread it to make sure it makes sense. Super mouse jumps off a step. And then a lot of praise. Yay, good job, persistence power. So whenever a kiddo gets stuck on a word, one of the best things you can do is just refer them to their powers that they have. And if they aren't sure which power to use, you could even give them a specific power. Tell them, oh, check your sound power. Oh, don't forget your picture power, and things like that. A lot of times in class, it's a lot easier to do because I've printed out all the charts and hung them up on the wall. And so I'll usually just walk over and point to it, or I'll have it in my binder and I'll point to the power and I'll say, oh, don't forget this power, because the visual pictures really help the kids too. Inside all the kids' book baskets, they have a version of this chart that looks like this. And so I'll usually just point to it and I'll say, oh, don't forget, do this to make sure it makes sense. Or I'll say oh, do this to make sure, to help you figure out the word. So one idea you could do is print those off and keep those next to your kiddo when they are trying to read. So when I talk about CVC words, that means consonant, vowel, consonant. So any 3-letter words with consonant, vowel, consonant, that's considered CVC word. We worked on that a lot a couple months ago, and recently, right before school closed, we started working on CCVC words, and so that's where we started using digraphs. So we would start using sh, and then ip. And then we would use our lasso power to lasso this word part together. And we would use our digraph power. And so then they're learning to break words apart so that they can sound them out like sh, ip, ship, rather than saying each sound separately. So if a kiddo made that mistake and they went sh, s, h, ip, then I might remind them, oh, don't forget digraph power. Do you see any letters that can get squished together to make a new sound? And then I'll wait for them. And if they don't know, then maybe I'll point and I'll reference a chart on the wall. And then usually they'll figure it out on their own by then. And then they'll say sh, ip. So in addition to starting to learn CCVC words and digraphs and word parts, we also started learning about how vowels make two sounds. And so we call this vowel power. Use your vowel power. And so if a kid's trying to sound out a word and they're trying to say like f, I, as, and they're confused, then two things I might do is I might reference picture power. Oh, check your picture power. What would make sense here? And then if they still don't get it, then I would say, oh, use your vowel power. Remember, vowels can make two sounds. Can you try it the other way? And then so if they said is, then I'll say, try it the other way. And they'll say, fly as. And I'll say, what makes sense with the picture and with your vowel power? And then usually they'll say, oh, flies. I'll say, yay, good job, persistence power. So we call them digraph power, word part power, and vowel power, but those really all just fall into sound power. And so usually I don't have to get that specific, and I'll just say, don't forget your sound power, and then most of the kids will remember. And then if they still get stuck, then I'll go into a more specific, like talk about digraphs or talk about word parts or lassoing or using those more like verbal and gestures to help remember. So I mostly talked about these powers in this video like centered around reading, but almost all of it can be straight applied to writing. So if a kid is writing the word and they write like the word cat, but they write C-U-T, then I would go and say, oh, let me try to use my turtle way and read it. And I might read their writing and write and say, cut? Is that what you meant? Cut? And they'll say, no, I meant cat. And then I'll say, oh, check your vowel power because I think you might need a different vowel there. And then I wouldn't tell them what vowel, but I would refer to them to our vowel shield or our vowel chart and then have them figure out that they need an A instead of a U. So almost everything that is a reading power is also a writing power. So this video was mostly just to help for families who are feeling a little confused, not sure like how to help their kid when they get stuck on a word when reading. But the most important thing is to read because exposure is one of the top ways to help a kid learn to read. So keep doing what you're doing at home. So I'm going to end it here. There's so many more strategies and skills that I could tell you about, but I think I'm already on to 10 minutes, and so I probably need to start cutting this off. But if you have any more questions or you want to hear about more strategies or anything like that, I'm always here for you. So feel free to shoot me an email and I'll get back to you.